Hi again then guys, and welcome to another specific look at a certain car from the 1.15 update, and this is one of the cars of the pack which you could say has the highest bar to achieve, really, as far as the fans go. This is one of the cars that I predicted would come back to the franchise, but in an interesting twist, it's not the exact car that I predicted, because I said a returning Nismo, but of course this one is technically the updated Nismo, so the newer version of the same lineage, because of course the normal GTR of the R35 generation that we have in the game is also the facelifted version. And it's interesting this way that we're going of just featuring the most notable GTRs, at least for now. You've got the couple of race cars in Group 3, Group 4, you've got a really cool rally car, which is a great new addition, because of course we didn't have any of those on Gran Turismo 6 for the GTR, and you've got the normal road car, and now the Nismo. Now I hope, for the most part, that they pretty much hold it off there. We don't need to be getting millions of GTRs back into the game again. That is the last thing that GT Sport needs, but of course, given the legacy of the franchise, don't be too surprised if they start bringing more variants back. Now, if you are going to bring one back, this one makes sense, because to some degree, the Black Edition, although great, would be kind of irrelevant on GT Sport, because you can't fit the flat floor, there are no visual upgrades, so it almost feels cancelled out by the facelifted version. Likewise with the Spec V. Yes, it's a little bit lighter, but not entirely necessary anymore. Whereas the Nismo, it does genuinely feel like a different car. And to me, I would say that the Nismo, and this is something which I believe I discussed in the review for the previous Nismo, it's a car which I personally feel, in a similar way funnily enough to the ZR1 for the Corvette and the ACR for the Viper, move the car from being a super sport model into what you could call a true supercar. And that's something which I've gone back and forth on so many times over the years, because to me the essential R35 I would not call a supercar. I would call it a super sports car, because being a supercar, as I've said before, is about much more than just performance. That's why something like a Lamborghini Miura could still be considered a supercar, even though its performance is slower than many supercars of today, because it's not just about performance, it's the entire package, it's the marketing, it's the purpose, it's the exclusivity, it's all of that. Whereas the GTR, for me, it really does fall more into a super sports car kind of class, with the 2+2 seat layout, more trunk space, more long distance appeal, a more affordable price, mass production. Those just aren't the hallmarks of a supercar. The Nismo, however, in a similar way to the Spec V, is this much more focused, hardcore, more powerful, certainly a lot quicker variant of the car. Now, the GTR Nismo that we already had in Gran Turismo 6 is arguably the fastest street car in the game for pure top speed. I've seen people get it to cruise at about 312 miles per hour without the use of slipstream, NOS, or even a downhill section. That's just sitting on its own at 312 around Route X. I've seen that done. I don't have that tune myself, but I have seen it done, and it was done by people who I trust. So that's pretty incredible performance. That's faster than the Veyron, that's faster than the Huayras. Of course, with NOS and slipstream, all other kind of factors come in, but purely on its own, it's a force to be reckoned with. Now, this one has a different aspect of the legacy to live up to, because of course, as we've said before, GT Sport isn't about that anymore. You can pretty much not get any car beyond a Red Bull, or not a Red Bull, a Tomahawk I should say, the Red Bull would as well if we had the faster ones, to exceed 300 miles per hour, because A, most of the cars just aren't capable of that with the kind of tuning that we can do, and B, you don't really have any tracks to do that on, unless you've got something like a Tomahawk, which doesn't just do that speed, but it gets there so quickly as well, in like half the time of a usual car, if not less. So for something like the Nismo now, it's almost entirely lost that advantage, because it's now irrelevant. On Gran Turismo 6, millions of miles were done by the community on Route X alone. This was one of the most popular cars on that track for racing, and although there are a ton of people who don't care for Route X or Route X racing, there are a whole lot of people who do, and those people can be clearly seen from all the people clamouring for the track to be brought back. And this was, as I said, a force to be reckoned with. Now, some of the specs are similar. you're looking at still under 600 horsepower, it's 591, 481 pound-feet of torque. It's still quite a hefty car at 1740 kilos, so it's no superleggera, that's for sure, but the horsepower per tonne is a decent enough 340, which for the weight isn't too bad. The category is of course correspondent to its power level, N600, and the price is a little bit more. In fact, it's about 30 grand more, basically. The car, or the at least equivalent of it, was 154 grand on Gran Turismo 6, whereas now it's 187. So that's not too much of a jump, given that it is a new model. So of course, with all of that in mind, is it good? Or at least, is it as dominant? Because you didn't see people using the Nismo as a track car as often, because the Black Edition is a better track car. It's as simple as that. You have the flat floor, all that kind of extra tuning option, which this one just doesn't have. Well, to some degree, I would say this is almost better suited now than it was on Gran Turismo 6 as a track car, because with the updated physics of the game, the fact that it is that little bit more realistic, in some ways a lot more realistic, the fact that the game allows you even to focus more on the handling side of things, rather than even myself spending most of my time over 300 miles per hour in a car like this, it allows you to actually take in the other aspects of the car's performance, be it handling, brakes, grip, acceleration even. And speaking of some of those, it has its disadvantages, for sure. The weight is one of them. It's such a heavy car that you definitely need to drop the weight, if at all possible. As far as power goes, you don't really need to change that much, because my times on this track aren't that far off my N900 Enzo. So in N600, that's pretty good. Not surprising for a GTR, but good nonetheless. However, there is one thing that you do need to be careful of, and that's the brakes, and this is something which keeps coming up in my reviews because it's an issue which has remained in the game literally since day one. It's very strange that once again, like Gran Turismo 5, you cannot upgrade the brakes. This is something which they need to solve. I would say it's a more important issue than Group X, because Group X is basically a really big inconvenience. Not having racing brakes is kind of essential, so it's strange that they still haven't done that, and this car would be so much faster if you could fit proper, say full-on carbon ceramic, vented, whatever, racing brakes instead of the standard ones. Not that they're bad, but that the racing ones simply do a better job, and you can feel that with any car that you can swap over to racing brakes with. It's about much more than changing the brake pressure or the brake power to the front or rear, any of that kind of stuff. However, the raw potential that the Nismo already had is certainly here on the game, but in some ways it's not quite as dominant, and in some ways it's better. I would say that the handling for sure is better. I always found the Nismo to be too heavy through corners, especially over the front end. That issue can be quite easily taken away now. With the diff alone, you can make it a much more responsive car, and the top end speed is the disadvantage. Not that it's slow, but that it's just not a way that it's going to be dominant anymore, because as I said, the game isn't about that. So if you are a Nismo fan, if you're just a GTR fan in general, well, chances are you probably already own it anyway, and for those who were asking and wondering, yes, I most probably will be doing a drag tune for it in the coming days. So stick around, of course, on the channel for that, as well as for reviews for all of the other cars in the pack. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.